Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program Rich Katz, who is Chief Technology Officer at Alemica. And today we're going to talk about how advancements in technology are facilitating end-to-end supply chain visibility. Now, achieving real-time end-to-end supply chain visibility, has been a top priority for companies across all industries, for a long time. But it's also been a kind of a difficult goal, to achieve. And in many ways, it's gotten more difficult over the years. But, there have been some advancements in technology that are helping to address, some of those challenges and also opening up new doors for new value and capabilities in supply chain visibility. So what are some of those advancements and how are they helping supply chain visibility? Well, those are some of the questions we're going to address today with Rich. And, he's in the front lines here working with clients, across all industries, they're at Alemica. And Rich, welcome to the program.
Hey, great to be here, Adrian. Thanks for inviting us to participate in this. Thank you.
So Rich, you obviously on the front lines of this. You're a first-time guest on Talking Logistics. So before we kind of dive into the topic, I always like to ask my guests, how and why they got involved with supply chain logistics to begin with. So why don't we start there real briefly? Tell us a little about your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Alemica.
Sure, absolutely. So I started, without the intent of getting into supply chain logistics. I started at a classic systems integrator. So it was Andersen back in the 90s. And when I started there, I was part of what we called an advanced technology group, kind of doing specialized custom application development. And then I kind of realized, some of this special development is getting eclipsed by the package systems. And then I moved into Oracle, I moved into PeopleSoft, and eventually I moved into Ariba implementations. Then during the whole .com, remember 2000, 2001, the heady days, I moved into a company called Rubber Network. And we were going to change the world. It was 2000, 2001. And we built an initial prototype of a supply chain network for the tire and rubber industry. And we really focused on the procurement side. Towards the end, we added more and more logistics capabilities to that platform. And then in 2009, the Rubber Network company was acquired by a very similar industry consortium, Alemica. And that's the company we are today. It's Alemica, comprised of 20 of the 22 largest chemical companies, as well as 10 of the 12 largest tire and rubber companies. Okay. In my current role, I am in charge of product engineering, and I am also in charge of product management.
Great. Yeah. So I remember those .com days well, but I think the companies that survived are those that evolved and kind of ultimately responded to what the market needs were and kind of leveraged technology to bring new innovations. And I think the evolution of Rubber Network with Alemica is a good example of that and where you guys are today. So let's get into the topic now. And like I said in my opening comments, obtaining real-time end-to-end supply visibility has remained an elusive or challenging goal for companies. Why has it been so difficult?
Well, first off, it really starts with data acquisition. So when you're dealing with end-to-end visibility for a large global manufacturer, you're dealing with a lot of disparate kind of companies. You're dealing with small customers, small shippers, large shippers, third-party LSPs. You may be dealing with some government entities. And it's about how am I going to get all that information from all these different sources? That's really challenge number one. And the second major challenge, which in some ways is even harder to deal with, is the disparate nature of the data when I actually get the data. I'm dealing with data from, again, all these different companies. A lot of them are small, a lot of them are large. They have IT departments with different capabilities. And I'm not necessarily going to be able to actually correlate that data to tell me, hey, where's my product? Where's it going? I just have a bunch of data that I can't necessarily use. So those are really the two main challenges.
Yeah, no, I agree, and we're going to dive into some of those things. I mean, I think the other reality is that you talked about the fact that this is a network, right? And you have to integrate and communicate and collaborate with a lot of different parties. I think another big challenge is the fact that those networks are continuously changing, right? People are adding new suppliers all the time and adding new customers all the time, third-party logistics providers. So it's a very dynamic environment. And just when you think that you probably have solved it today, your network's going to look completely different, 6 months or a year from now. And you're kind of continuously having to, manage some of those challenges that you talked about there. So let's talk about that, particularly with the integration piece. I mean, like I said, in some ways, obtaining supply chain visibility, has gotten more difficult over the years, because of outsourcing and globalization and product proliferation and many other factors. But in other ways, it's gotten easier, thanks to advancements in technology. And certainly one of those areas that it's playing a role in is in integration. So how are today's technologies facilitating, trading partner and system integration?
Well, to start with, I think you hit the nail on the head. You have to think of the integration first and foremost as a network kind of problem. So what that means is, because your networks are so fluid, your real physical networks for your supply chain, every time you have to add another partner, whether it's a shipper, whether it's a customer, whether it's an LSP, you want to be able to leverage that connection once. You don't want to be able to constantly have to add a point-to-point connection for a specific problem. So if you, really think about it as a network, and the new technologies do think about all of these integration in general as a network problem, so you get reusability. And then once you do that, you also, in conjunction, should make sure you have the proper kind of data model so that you can model it appropriately, so that you can actually link all of the disparate formats. And what I mean by that is, when you're trying to provide a comprehensive view of the end-to-end supply chain, you have to do a lot of linking of different signals, different business signals. If we take the case of fulfillment, and the way I'm defining fulfillment here is a customer gets a purchase order, a customer of ours receives a purchase order. That purchase order has to be planned. That purchase order has to be confirmed. We have to book the shipment to get that material all the way to the end-to-end customer. And in order to link these different transactions, we have to ensure that the data model uses what we call kind of let's say the data model speaks the same language. We have a common semantic framework. And so today's technology is really built around a canonical, and a proper canonical that is agnostic, not tied to a particular standard, not tied to ChemXML, or not just tied to X12, but a canonical that can handle different formats, flat files, iDocs, X12, and actually put that data in a format where we can link the PO to the sales order, to the booking, to the status messages, and provide that clear visibility to where the product is and what's happening in the supply chain. I think those are probably the two key points that today's integration technology really helps us with. In the past, it was more difficult to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first point, aligns with kind of what I've been saying for years. I mean, I've been a big proponent of supply chain operating networks for a long time, mainly because I tell manufacturers and retailers and others that they should get out of the connectivity business, right? Making and managing hundreds, if not thousands, of individual connections, and like I mentioned earlier, the fact that these trading partners are constantly changing. Is a daunting task, and it's quite frankly a task that they haven't really been doing very well, to begin with. So, moving to a model that's more akin to almost like a utility, if you will, where you make a single connection to a network, and now you've got access to a broader network of trading partners. I think is certainly my view of the future, and I think a lot of companies are kind of seeing the power and the benefits of taking the network model. The other thing you talked about is also corresponds to something that I always view as supply chain has always been kind of this Tower of Babel, right? It's there was always this push to go towards adopting standards, but the reality is that every company took a standard and they for lack of a better term, bastardized it. They would change the fields and the orientation, everything else. So that's what added a lot of the challenges for folks like you in terms of trying to, bring all that data information, because everyone might be using quote unquote a standard, but it really wasn't a standard, right?
Oh, no, absolutely. So there were, going back to our particular situation, we were founded as Alemica back in 2002. And as part of that, we all agreed, that is the large chemical companies that created Alemica, that we would transact using Sidex ChemXML. And then those standards gradually changed. Sidex upgraded those standards. And we had many partners that just said, it's going to be hard for me to upgrade those standards. So when you have, if you agree to a standard and you don't keep up with the formats, it's no longer a standard. Also, we've had a lot of companies that as they upgraded SAP decided, we'd rather just send you an IDOC. And as we all know, SAP IDOCs are typically never standard themselves. They're tied to the implementation. So the approach we took with Alemica in 2012, after looking back at the previous 10 years and the challenge with standards, was we were going to create, and we did create, what we called a agnostic data model. We call it our universal business document, and it's comprised of what we call universal business concepts. And so when transactions come out of our platform, they're always going through a very semantically standardized form. And that means a purchase order number is a purchase order number, a unit price is a unit price. We don't have to deal with things like a BEG 03 or a BEL-NOR, which are standard specific metadata terms for purchase orders. We just call it a purchase order. It makes it a lot easier. It provides really just that common semantic framework to drive visibility and to drive reusable logic. And it's really the way to go if you're going to provide end-to-end global visibility.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. So let's talk about now kind of looking data from a different angle, which is, we're really seeing the explosion of data sources, today, everything from, mobile devices to, sensors embedded in just about everything. So what impact is that having on supply chain visibility?
So it has a terrific impact. There's two main areas. First off, it improves data acquisition. So if we're able to get GPS signals from a truck or from a carrier fleet management system, or we're able to get even basic status messages from a driver, from an application, or even from something simpler such as an SMS kind of process, that increases the overall granularity of the kind of visibility that we can provide. So number one, it helps us get all of that data. We're acquiring more data easily, and the more data we have, the greater granularity in the kind of visibility we can provide. So we can provide, almost real-time tracking of a shipment from when it leaves the gate at a shipper to when it goes into the gate at a customer, and the customer finally unloads it. So we can provide that level of visibility. But we can also, with all these new kind of technologies for data sources, we can provide information about the product as well. So we can track temperature in real time, we can track pressure in real time, and we can link that into the process. So that not only tells us where the product is, but if that product is at risk. And that's all because of these new data sources that are becoming available. And they're not necessarily new, they're becoming more common, and they're at a much more competitive price point than they were.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think what you're seeing is kind of addressing that kind of real time, component of it, right? Because I think, some of the challenges historically was with EDI as an example, a lot of latency, in that, right? And limitations in terms of, the type of information you can get. So I think some of these new data sources with GPS and wireless and mobile and so forth, provides that, helps fill in some of those black holes that existed, historically. Now, of course, the problem with more data is that you could end up with more poor quality data, which is, which I always view as the Achilles heel of supply chain, visibility. I mean, are there better ways for companies to, manage and improve data quality?
There are a number of ways. First off, when you can do it, it's always great to make sure that you address the data quality issue at the system of record. But in many cases, when you're dealing with a use case such as end-to-end visibility, that's going to be a challenge because you're dealing with a lot of things that are beyond your control. And so historically, what we see is a certain kind of patterns of data quality problems. So, and this, of course, means you have the data already and it's coming in. But let me give you a good example. In the basic fulfillment use case, the process typically starts with the shipper receiving an order. The shipper will then confirm that order. And then the shipper, when the shipper confirms that order, that shipper is going to link a purchase order with a sales order number, okay? Then it gets interesting when you're dealing with booking the shipment itself. Typically, the booking is going to come from the shipper. It's going to go to the carrier. It's going to have a sales order number that will link to a delivery note and ultimately a shipment. Now, all of these have to be linked to be able to provide that kind of visibility. But typically, we'll see that a shipper may change the sales order number in their systems from when they confirm it to their customer to when they actually book it with the carrier. So typically, they may add a prefix of 3 zeros. And we see that situation pretty commonly, either 2 zeros or some other kind of standard prefix that the same shipper who's creating those numbers, depending what system it's coming from. So if it's going back and he's confirming an order, it will be okay. But when it goes to a carrier or it goes to a different system, it will be somewhat changed. And we see those rules and we essentially say, okay, for this, and this also goes back to the network, for this particular partner on the network, when we receive their sales order number coming from a booking, we're going to create a separate concept that we call a tracking concept. And we use that for that carrier or for that shipper for all of his connections. And what we do is we get that sales order number, we leave the transaction alone, but we take the sales order number, we strip out the leading zeros, and we put it in a tracking field, essentially a tracking data element. And we use that to track all of that customer, all of that shipper's shipments throughout the network. So there are ways, in other words, we're dealing with data inconsistency at the point when we see it, and we're able to reuse the logic that we put in place to clean up that data in real time, essentially.
Right. No, that's a great example.
Hopefully that wasn't too long. I went through a lot of detail.
No, I thought it was a great example because I think that the type of what you just described there, I think is common, for many companies, and in terms of that's what ends up breaking, some of that visibility.
Simple things like that. And it'd be great if you could go back to the source system and strip them off. But typically it could be an expensive proposition for a company to go in there and actually modify their system of record.
Right. And sometimes it's, it's not just a system thing, it's just a process thing, right? I mean, that's the way that, they define that process that way for whatever internal reasons that they have. And, so it goes beyond just the IT requirement there.
Yeah, so we have to deal with it. And that's what we do. So we provide our customers the capability to deal with that, the chaotic data that's in the dirty data that's in the real world. Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that to me, being able to adequately address, data quality issues, being able to, number one, identify it early on. Number two, be able to hopefully implement or automate some corrective actions. And number three, be in situations where it's not practical or easy, to do, to find a way to work around it, if you will, to, keep those connections linked, if you will, as the order is moving from origin to ultimately final destination. Moving on to kind of another topic that's getting a lot of buzz and interest today is artificial intelligence and machine learning. What role are these technologies having or will have in supply chain visibility moving forward?
I think a great role, a lot of potential there. I think the number one potential is really being able to take a look at historical data and make predictions. So in other words, the way we traditionally handle supply chain visibility, the way the process works is we're providing an overlay of visibility based on very explicit signals coming from the players, whether it's the shipper, the carrier, any of the third-party LSPs that may be part of the process. So these explicit signals could be a status, could be a confirmation, could be a booking that will actually say, you know what, we didn't meet the original order date, or we're changing the quantity. So these are coming from source systems. They're coming from the trading partners, and we know that they are accurate. But the real potential for AI is to kind of look back and say, all right, we have a huge history of shipments, and these shipments all have known outcomes, and the outcomes are pretty simple. They're either late or they're on time. All of these shipments also have a number of different parameters. It could be the carrier that was involved. It could be the product. It could be the equipment type that was required to move that product. It could be the day of the year. It could be the day of the week, Friday versus Saturday, possible labor issues. And so with machine learning, we take a look at the historical situations, the historical models, and then we're able to make a prediction so that when a new shipment comes in, maybe explicitly everything looks good, and everything typically does look good until it doesn't look good anymore, and the product is late, and you can have a potential big shutdown at a facility that can be quite expensive. But with machine learning, we can say, all right, even though the explicit signals are telling us everything is okay, looking back historically for this kind of product going over this kind of lane, this day of the year, we saw that 70% of the time this shipment was actually late by 36 hours. And so we're able to apply those kind of algorithms to the shipments in transit based on historical performance and make an updated prediction. So we'll let, at Alemico, with our product, we'll let our customers know explicitly the shipment looks great, but just so you know, this has a 65% chance based on historical analysis of being late.
Right. So I think, what I see is, the opportunity. I mean, I think one of the business case for visibility, obviously, is to have a feedback loop, mm-hmm. right? Where you're actually taking that information and you're going back in and you're adjusting your constraints, you're adjusting your, making improvements to the process, mm-hmm. So on and so forth, so that, to drive continuous improvement, right?
Absolutely.
I think going back to kind of data sources, as part of machine learning and artificial intelligence, are you looking at the possibility of integrating, things like weather or traffic or, other types of real-time data sources that can also impact things,
Absolutely.
So if there's a big storm coming up or there's a tornado or a monsoon or something, building that into the process as well.
Absolutely. So there are a number of third-party, let's call them specialized API providers that are able to make predictions on whether a vessel is going to be late or not late. So we're incorporating that into our overall visibility process. There are other companies that actually look at all these broader risk signals, things like, hey, the weather at a particular port, or even going a little bit further back into the supply chain. They could look at whether a particular geolocation may have a power issue, may have a natural gas issue, may have a labor issue. And that would also tell us that an open shipment, or particularly an open inbound order, is at risk, because what we're seeing are let's call it unstructured sources of information that are telling us of a potential problem in a potential area, and then we're able to combine that with the actual very structured transactional data and say, you know what, this shipment is at risk because of this kind of problem, this kind of labor problem, this kind of weather problem.
Yeah, no, I think
structured with that unstructured to provide better visibility, and that's part of it.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities moving forward in kind of both the AI, machine learning, and leveraging some of these data sources that we've talked about here. Of course, we talked about supply chain operating networks from kind of an integration side, but there's mm-hmm. Also the software side of a supply chain operating network, mm-hmm. and so that plays a role in enabling and facilitating supply chain visibility. And you recently introduced a new application focused on visibility. I mean, what input or feedback did you get from, from customers in developing, that applications? I mean, what capabilities did they prioritize?
Certainly, the first thing that they prioritized was the linking of the transaction. So, in other words, as a supply chain network, as an integration network, in the past we were about very explicit but discrete signals: an order, a status, a booking confirmation. So, what was most important to our customers was to be able to provide a very simple linked view. We didn't want customer service. We didn't want logistics people to have to be EDI experts to log into a dashboard and open up iDocs and open up X12s and link BEG L3s with Belnors and all of that. So they wanted a very simple view that sits on top of all the complex EDI and integration formats and links all of those transactions, and basically tells us on an exception basis what shipment is at risk and why it's at risk. In other words, is it at risk because it's going to be early? Is it at risk because it's going to be late? Is it at risk because it will be on time, but it will be only partially filled? And so that's the kind of things our customers are very, very interested in seeing.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it goes down to the basic question, right? Where's my shipment? And only show me. Yeah, where's my shipment, or where's my order? And if only show me things that are that fall outside of what's planned, right? Only show me the exceptions.
Yeah.
And everything else, if everything's going well, I don't need to see it, right?
Right. And we do give them the ability in general. If they want, they could see everything. But the UIs and alerting systems absolutely should be very focused on exceptions, because when you're dealing with some of these large industrial companies, you're dealing with a lot of shipments, and people just want to focus on those exceptions.
Right. So, Rich, we're cutting short on time here, so I'm just going to go right to my last couple of questions here. Sure. So when it comes to facilitating supply chain visibility, I mean, what's next? I mean, what other technologies or capabilities are on the horizon?
Yeah, I think you have to talk about blockchain with visibility. I think what blockchain brings to the table, number one, it forces all participants into using a canonical standard, right? So everyone will be speaking the same language. If you're participating in a particular supply chain's blockchain, you're already speaking that same language. So when you write a shipment, when you write to the blockchain a status, all of that is in the same language. It's immutable. It's there forever. And essentially, the blockchain becomes a way to document the process in an immutable way, an immutable fancy word for we can't change it, we can't edit it. So multiple parties basically recording the history of product movement in a blockchain. And I think that can be a game changer. We're still kind of early. We're perfecting the security models, and there's some scalability challenges that as an industry we need to work through. But I think that's a real breakthrough technology that will help broaden the capability of visibility and make it easy for more people to realize those benefits.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that certainly a lot of discussion around blockchain. I think a couple of years ago, I wrote a post about it, whether, blockchain will become the operating system of supply chain operating networks in the future. To your point, I think there's still a lot of confusion. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in that area, but it's something that, I encourage, supply chain professionals as well as the technology community keep a pulse on, because it's worthwhile to see how that continues to develop. So as a way to wrap up, I mean, what questions should companies ask themselves to assess whether they're taking the most effective and up-to-date approach to enabling supply chain visibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the original challenges, and I think if there's if there's an interest at a particular company to provide supply chain visibility, they have to ask themselves, how am I going to get all the data that's required? These are typically open systems, so they need to think about what the process is, what vendors they may want to use, but they do need to think about acquiring all of that data. If you have holes in that data, you're going to get a lot of gaps in the visibility. Users are going to lose confidence in what that visibility or how accurate that visibility is. Number two, they really need to think about, all right, if I can get this data, how am I going to structure it? How am I going to put it in a format where it is usable? Okay, and how am I going to handle data quality issues? I need a process to make the transactions, all the business signals linked together, so I get that nice, pretty view of where my stuff is. And how am I going to do that? And how am I going to handle the dirty data that's definitely out there in the real world?
Yeah, I think that those are the two, certainly two basic but very important questions to ask that I think, kind of links to everything we talked about today. Well, Rich, I always say at the end of all our episodes, we always just manage to scratch the surface, but I think we covered a lot of ground today. I think we brought up a lot of important, ideas and concepts, and we identified, some of the, advancements in technology that are, helping, companies, achieve this goal of obtaining end-to-end supply chain visibility. So again, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Absolutely. And thanks again, Adrian.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us today. If you are watching this episode on demand, either at the Alemica website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Rich, you could post it there. I'm sure that he'd be more than happy to respond via that medium.
Absolutely.
Again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.